Y'all think you know country music? Let's see if you know this. Part 137. This is Jimmy Ray McBride. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama on April 28th, 1947. His daddy was James Alvin, and his mama was Helen Hills McBride. When Jim was 6 years old, his parents bought him a plastic Gene Autry guitar, and he loved it. Jim and his family always listened to the radio, especially on Saturday night at the Grand Ole Opry. He went to Rising Elementary School and had him a little paper route with the Huntsville Times newspaper. He spent a whole lot of his paper route money buying 45 RPM records from Arnold Hornbuckle's record store in downtown Huntsville. At a real young age, Jim developed an interest in country music songwriting, even buying the magazine Country Song Roundup to read about the stories behind the songs. A couple of his favorite songwriters were Hank Williams and Don Gibson. Jim actually wrote his first song when he was 12 years old. It was a song about William Bonney, or Billy the Kid. He put his words that he wrote to a melody from a song about Davy Crockett. By the time he graduated from Lee High School in 1965, he was getting melodies and lyrics popping up in his head all the time. So not long after that, he decided he'd hop on old Interstate 65 and go a little north to Nashville and try to pitch some of his songs. He had started working as a mail carrier in 1966 for the United States Postal Service, but he had a cousin named Patsy Upton that knew a fireman named Raymond Smith that was a friend of legendary songwriter Curly Putman, another North Alabama boy. So Raymond called Curly, set up an appointment for Curly and Jim to meet. Well, once the two met, Curly took Jim under his wing. He became a good friend to him and a mentor to a young and hungry Jim McBride. Curly would then introduce him to a friend of his, Maurice Ramsey. Maurice was a fireman. He also had a band and was a good musician. So Jim would start singing lyrics that he wrote to Maurice, and Maurice would write a melody while Jim was singing the lyrics, and that's how they come up with the songs. Then they'd record what they wrote on these old reel-to-reel tapes. One day, Curly told Jim his desire truly was to succeed as a songwriter. He needed to buy a guitar. So the very next day, Jim sold his pistol and bought him a Yamaha FG75 guitar for $62 from Stan Moore at Quarter Music. Then in the early 70s, there was a new recording studio that opened in Huntsville called the Contentation Recording Studio. Jim, along with many other aspiring songwriters, would just hang out here a lot. Well, then an artist named Price Mitchell cut one of Jim's songs, the B-side of his new record. This song was called I Might As Well Be Home.
Your love's not here and I might as well be home.
After that, the Hager brothers from Hee Haw recorded 5 of Jim's songs, their album on Barnaby Records. Now, this didn't make Jim any real money, but it did get his songs out to the world. And it had to be pretty awesome to sit there and listen and watch your songs being sang on Hee Haw every week. In 1974, Jim started doing some demos for Bobby Bare. Not long after that, Bare sold his company. So Jim kind of stopped writing at that point for about 4 years. In 1978, he started writing around with another North Alabama boy, one of the best songwriters of all time, a buddy, Mr. Roger Murrah. One day in 1980, Jim and Roger wrote a song that would forever change their lives. Jim told Roger that he would quit his job and move to Nashville if their song got cut. Well, one night, Roger called him and said, "Well, I guess you need to pack your bags. We've got Conway's next single." So Jim quit the post office the day after Christmas of 1980, moved to Franklin, Tennessee. That song was A Bridge That Just Won't Burn. By January 1981, it would peak at number 3 on the charts. Then it won a BMI Country Award that same year. And when Conway came to do his show at the Von Braun Civic Center in Huntsville, Alabama, Jim got to bring his mother, Ellen, to see Conway singing one of her boys' songs. His mother, Helen, would pass away later that year. Now, this big hit that he had on Conway Twitty earned Jim a big songwriting deal, Jerry Foster, Bill Rice, and Roger Murrah. A few short months later, old Mel McDaniel cut 2 of Jim's songs, called If I Keep On Going Crazy and 10 Years, 3 Kids, and 2 Loves Too Late. But then in September, one and only Johnny Lee cut one of Jim's songs. This would be Jim McBride's first #1 hit. The song was called Bet Your Heart on Me. After that, he would have a string of album cuts, a ton of artists. I'll go through some of these pretty quick. If you want to hear the song, you can look it up on the corresponding album. Shame by John Conley. This Bed's Not Big Enough and Tender Hearts by Louise Mandrell. Can't Leave That Woman Alone by Charlie Pride and Mo Bandy. Then in March 1983, Alabama cut one of Jim's songs for their The Closer You Get album, which sold over 4 million copies. This is one of my favorite songs on that record, a song called Dixie Boy. It's a song Jim wrote about swinging on the front porch swing with his mama in the shadow of an old cotton mill called the Dallas Cotton Mill, waiting on his daddy to come home from work. Great song. After that, he would get a few cuts every year on different albums, from Johnny Rodriguez to Keith Whitley to John Anderson to Crystal Gayle. Johnny Cash even cut a song that Jim wrote with Guy Clark called Heavy Metal Don't Mean Rock and Roll to Me. Check that one out on Johnny Cash's Coming to Town. Then in 1987, Jim got together with another songwriter named Stuart Harris, and they wrote a wonderful song that would end up being Waylon's final #1 song. The song was called Rose in Paradise. Great song. 1987, George Jones would record Survivor. And then Jim got a phone call one night. It was from a young, aspiring country singer that was a big fan of Jim's work. He wanted to write with Jim. Well, the two met up, and for their first meeting, they wrote a damn good song. That song was called Chasing That Neon Rainbow, and that young man's name was Alan Jackson. Then when Alan Jackson got his record deal, he cut this song, and he cut a bunch of songs that they wrote. Chasing That Neon Rainbow would hit #2 on the charts.
Just wanna be heard and seen, chasing that neon rainbow, living that honky-tonk dream.
After that, Jim would continue having cuts. Even one of my favorite artists, Mr. Travis Tritt, recorded a song called The Road Home. Great song. Allergic to the Blues that Mr. Randy Travis cut. Sawmill Road that Diamond Rio cut. So many more. If all that ain't enough, in 1993, Jim was about to have the biggest hit of his career so far. It was a song he wrote with Alan Jackson while on a bus trip. It was a #1 country song for Alan Jackson and Jim McBride for 4 weeks. It won the 1994 CMA Single of the Year and Song of the Year, and it got nominated for a Grammy. It was also Alan Jackson's very first entry on the Billboard Hot 100 charts, which is an all-genre chart, not just country, and the record sold over 3 million units. The name of that song was Chattahoochee. Jim said Sidney Lanier was a poet who wrote a poem called Song of the Chattahoochee. That was in some high school literature books. I was sitting in my home office in Nashville one day, and I had just read a book about the Chattahoochee. I started playing a little melody, and then the words popped in my head. Down yonder on the Chattahoochee, it gets hotter than a hoochie coochie. I went out on the road shortly with Alan after that, so I showed the song to him because I discovered that the Chattahoochee River ran through his hometown of Newnan, Georgia. I sang the first couple lines, and Alan was all over it. We started working on it in Tallahassee, Florida, and then we finished it by the next afternoon in Thibodaux, Louisiana. We finished it before sound check, and Alan showed it to the band. So they worked it up at sound check and actually performed it that night. This is by far one of Alan Jackson's biggest songs to this day. Unbelievable. In 1995, Jim was given the Creators Award from the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. And in 2000, he got an ACM nomination for Song of the Year for his song Angels in Waiting by Tammy Cochran, a great song. He was awarded 3 awards from the Nashville Songwriters Association International, and he served on the board and as president of that organization. His songs have been on records that have sold over 70 million albums worldwide, and he is by far one of the most colorful songwriters of all time. In recent years, he married an old classmate of his named Jeannie Ivy, and then the two moved back to Alabama. A few years ago in 2022, Jim's book, Lines About Life, was released. I highly encourage y'all to go read that. Earlier this week, January 6, 2026, Jim passed away at the age of 78. I want to say a little personal note here. Back around 2008, I had started playing in some bars, and I wrote some songs that really wasn't that good. There was a friend of mine, David Hammonds, that really believed in me from the start for some reason. Well, he knew Jim McBride, and he suggested that I meet up with Jim to try co-writing with a professional songwriter in Nashville. Well, in the meantime, I was at a songwriter show in Fort Payne, Alabama, during Alabama's June Jam week. Randy Owen actually introduced me to another songwriter, Frank Myers. I was able to set up a co-write with Frank Myers and Jim McBride, and they could not have been kinder to me, because at that time I didn't know how to structure my songs very good. But I would learn really quick from guys like Jim McBride and Mark Narmore, another one of my favorite writers that I used to frequently write with back in those days. Jim became a friend from that day forward. We always kept in touch, and I'll forever be grateful to Jim McBride. Jim wasn't about chasing the current trend. He never was. He was a real person, and I think that's why me and him connected from the very get-go. I actually just talked to him last month, and he was going to send me a signed copy of his book because he said my name was in his book, which I couldn't believe. But it's really hard to believe he's gone. I was going to have him on the podcast coming up, and I hate that I missed that opportunity, and I hate that he's gone. And my heart goes out to his wife, Jeannie, and their family. Rest assured there will never be another Jim McBride. Appreciate y'all watching. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.